Here we go. All right. So now I'm going to hit share screen, and I'm going to share this schedule. All right. Can you see the schedule?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So the reason I want to show you this is because some of the people on this, first of all, this is the Southern Nevada Mensa Tuesday night Zoom event. And before we get going with the actual event itself, I thought I'd show you the schedule so far and what we've done, because some of the people on this call don't realize that we've been doing this for a while. So we had, as you can see, on June the 9th was our first one. And June 16th, we had another one. These are every Tuesday. And then how do you know you should write a book? The Power of Strengths. Last week, we had the economics of crime, kidnapping, and advanced money laundering, which I thought was very interesting. Could everybody mute their, not you, Elizabetta, but everybody else mute their thing? We've got a lot of hissing and stuff because everybody's not muted.
Hey, Len, this is Terry Smith.
Yeah.
We have a visitor with us tonight, Leslie Nix. She took the practice test online.
Cool.
But she wants to test, and I think she will qualify. But as we all know here, we're not testing at the present time. So.
Thank you very much for allowing me to join in.
Oh, you're welcome. We do invite guests to this, so it's. I'm glad you're here. Okay, I'm trying to. Okay, I had to admit a few more people. Just a second. All right, so I'm looking at my other screen if you wonder. Okay, all right, so as you can see, we've got an interesting schedule. Obviously, we have an interesting subject tonight, and we've got 5 more in the can. Richard Lederer will be on August the 18th. He's always interesting. If you haven't seen Richard, he's kind of a fascinating person in many ways. Okay, so I'm going to unshare this, and just a second. I got to stop. I got to stop sharing. There it is. Okay, now we're back to the normal thing. So Elizabetta, go ahead and hit share and put your thing up there, and then I'm going to get rid of the schedule.
Okay.
And I'll introduce you. So sorry about that. I've tried something new today. I'll never do that again. Jeez. So tonight we have a great speaker, Elizabetta
Panzica.
Panzica. She's a writer, a published poet, nominated Poet of the Year in 1999. She writes paranormal fantasy about Atlantis, and in her heart actually believes it's a real place. Tonight she's going to present a lot of facts and insights, as well as an excerpt from her novel, which you can see on the screen there, and let the audience decide for themselves. So following her presentation, we're going to have a Q&A, okay, assuming there's questions. And as you think of your questions, just type them into the chat. Okay, I'll see the chat questions and I'll organize them for our Q&A. However, if there's a question, something that needs to be clarified for all the participants, I'll go ahead and interrupt Elizabetta and pose the issue, whatever it is. In the meantime, let's keep everything muted like we have it, so that we don't get a lot of noise coming into our presentation. It's all yours, Elizabetta. And I'm going to put it on speaker view. There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Len. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed Mensans. Today I'm going to talk about Atlantis and Lemuria. I will present some facts, and I will also present things that aren't facts, things that can't be proven, but that can be true. I'm adding Lemuria to the talk because no one can really tell the story of Atlantis without Lemuria. And this book is actually not my own that I'm showing right now. The book here is written by Shirley Andrews, and I used that one as research. And the background is supposedly Lemuria, and they had an advanced civilization as well. As you can see the flying saucer in the background. And this gentleman in the picture is supposed to be one of the great kings of Lemuria, Adama. And all that is presented in the study of this book, Lemuria and Atlantis. And the two just go hand in hand. First, I'm going to give an excerpt from my novel, and it's going to be from the second book in my series. It's a series of 6 books. My first book just came out, and it's called The Atlantean Empire. It was released on June 19th this year, and it's available on Amazon. And for those that live in California, it's for sale in Sleepless in Laguna bookstore. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from my novel, and this will just be 4.5 pages, not too long. And the ending will go into the fact portion of it. Okay. Hathor, an army of medicine men approached. Sahar could hear their footsteps behind her, and she huddled over Hathor's lifeless body, holding it close, streaks of black coal and malachite running down her eyes. 2 men tugged at her shoulders, pulling her upward. "Don't touch her!" Sahar rose, laying the still warm body down. "Don't touch her!" Her chin trembled. "Leave her alone. Please, move aside, my queen." A man in a long blue robe restrained her, pulling Sahar's hands back and tying them with the silk robe. "I'm sorry." His voice was loud. "I'm the queen. Unhand me." Sahar pushed her head back against the man's chest. "She was my friend. I loved her." She glared, nostrils flaring. "We did too," the man said. "You cannot interfere with this process. You are the queen of Atlantis, not Egypt. Mummification is sacred to us, as it was to her." He averted his gaze. Sahar could tell from his expression that he was just as hurt as she. She had dropped the manuscript in the struggle. She looked at the book, flipped it open on the ground. "Please, release me." Sahar looked up at her captor. The priest loosened the tie around her wrists, nodding toward the next chamber. "Go," he said, gently nudging at the small of her back. "Hurry." She crouched, gathering the manuscript into her chest and slipping it under her arm. She turned, went to her knees, and kissed the queen's head. "Goodbye, sweetest friend." The embalmers ignored her. They prayed and went about their business as if Sahar wasn't even there. There was a pounding in her ears and her stomach churned. Outside the chamber, Sahar knelt on the floor. She felt sick. The marble felt cold, hard, and uncomfortable. It made her knees ache, but she was determined to remain. She gazed at Hathor, watched as the holy men entered the queen's chamber, disrobed and bathed her with natron, and poured out small amounts of it from a small green vessel. Sahar gagged at the stench. Afterward, Sahar saw Hathor's internal organs taken out and preserved into canisters, and in 40 days her body would be washed again, but with oil and fragrant spices, preparing it for the final stages of mummification. Sahar could not bear the thought. She walked away, saddened. She could not stop them from taking Hathor's body. She rose in the middle of the night, shaking, drenched in sweat. A quick glance at her chamber door sent a chill down her spine. She rubbed the back of her shoulder. It ached from sleeping sitting upright with her back to the wall. This place called Egypt. She could feel the pulse of it as she lay on the pyramid's floor. Egypt had become her home. Its people had taken her and her subjects under their wing. She was grateful. Sahar reached into her robe, pulling out a writing instrument. She held it for a long time, cradling it in her hands, as if carrying something precious. "Hathor?" Sahar's voice caught, and she reached out in front of her into the darkness, as if to grasp a pair of hands. The idea her friend was dead had not sunk in. Sahar wrote through the night until her fingers went numb, as though an invisible force drove her hands. sometimes aware of the words that came, sometimes not. She would be dead before sunrise. Sahar fingered the manuscript as if seeing it for the first time. It was finished. Her part had been added. She began to read. After the fall of Atlantis, our people came upon the land of the river Nile. Our homeland had vanished into the sea, and we became a wandering people without a place to call home. I led them into Egypt, an extension of Kemet, the true Egypt, a land existing before the fall. Egypt's people were our allies. We maintained steady contact with them for centuries. Egypt became one of many destinations for Atlantean refugees. With the fall of our mighty kingdom came a terrible void that nothing could fill. My brothers and sisters in Egypt knew this, and they embraced me. For centuries before the actual cataclysm, those with vision erected great cities beneath the earth's surface, both underwater and beneath the earth itself, in an effort to save as many lives as possible. Mystics directed the construction of subterranean tunnels dug day after day by hundreds of citizens and leaders alike. An intricate maze was created leading to an underground civilization called Telos, overseen by Adama. Huge quantities of supplies were gathered and stored, cultivated beneath the earth's surface for centuries. People prepared for the end for decades. Some built great ships carrying and protecting thousands when the floods came. Some filled their arks with jewels and material wealth, crammed with beautifully woven silks, intricate tapestries, expensive works of art, and every conceivable worldly object known to man. Others filled their arks with animals, people, seeds, and plant life, seeking to preserve life. Though many prevailed, a great many did not. Countless lives were lost, blameless lives, playing no role in the events that determined their destinies. Still, I try to find reasons, but my own acquired humanity keeps me from seeing beyond what those reasons might have been. The floods destroyed all records written down and recorded through the ages. As a result, humanity reverted into a state of ignorance, not to be transcended for centuries. A new world was erected from the ashes of the old. Seedlings of ancient knowledge were planted, but the harvest was not yet ripe. Every branch of knowledge compiled throughout time had been lost, with bits and pieces kept alive only within the memory of Atlantean refugees. In collaboration with the royal family of Egypt, we Atlanteans released our knowledge to the natives of Egypt, but realized that neither the Egyptians nor any other culture in existence at that time was prepared to use such wisdom and deal with it responsibly. Civilization would remain at a standstill until the day it was ready to evolve and grow once more. The time would eventually come. The first indication would be rapid growth within a short span. Technology would begin to reappear within the span of a single century. In the distant future, 1,000 centuries from now perhaps, nobody knows, but there would be signs, similarities to the old world. Yet even knowing this, I cannot help but wonder if our efforts have all been in vain. Has society fallen only to regress? Has our world crumbled only to be forgotten? Sahar pushed the book away and slammed it shut. Her heart ached for all that was lost. In her mind, she saw images of a future civilization. The book folded and closed in her hands. History would repeat itself. The thought drifted into her mind, taking complete control over all other thoughts. As long as humanity allowed it, history would repeat itself. She quailed, sneezing, squeezing her eyes shut. Tears pricked at her heart until it was raw. Evil had been put down at the expense of innocent lives. She played an influential role, and now remorse ate at her very core. Weapons with the capacity to destroy an entire planet had been obliterated. Powerful leaders who once controlled entire nations exterminated, and a new world erected, but all at the expense of the innocent. Flattened against the canvas of truth, Sahar saw images of a future civilization. Atlantis would rise again. The images danced in her head. Suddenly, the illusion of life seemed all too real, her humanity almost concrete. She had become too attached, too entangled in the issues of her world. Atlantis had become a part of her. She had lost herself in the illusion. The queen jumped, heart pounding. The pyramid rumbled. The earth shook beneath her. Dozens of Egyptian embalmers and priests rolled an 800-pound stone across the width of the pyramid's entrance, sealing the tomb shut. Within hours, Sahar's breathing grew labored as the air in the chamber became scarce. She was buried alive. Sahar lay down, trying to find comfort in the darkness. Her lungs labored. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she could see an orange blur. Flames flickered against stone, just as she had left it, so very, very long ago. Then suddenly, she was back in Atlantis, as it was many, many years ago. So this is the fiction portion of it, of course. So now I'd like to move on with the next words here. This is Plato, and Plato had written one of the very first accounts of Atlantis. And it says that, let me see, Atlantis was not built in a month, and it would take days, even weeks, to recount its history. So today I will touch on just a few things. One thing that struck me, though, as I was doing all this research and as I went to the bookstores, was that as I searched for books, I realized that the books were no longer under mythology and legends, but under the history section instead. This is a large shift from the idea that Atlantis is a fairy tale contrived by our ancestors to the belief that Atlantis was an actual place that existed, a society that came to a tragic end. Once we believed that the world was flat, now we know the truth. Similarly, once we believed that Atlantis was a myth, now we know that it is not. Over 200 sunken cities have been discovered under the sea by archaeologists in the Mediterranean, most of them associated with Atlantis. This is a fact, a scientific archaeological find, not some crazy story somebody made up. We know now beyond a shadow of a doubt that there once was a people living in those cities, people whose lives were cut short. The paved streets that line the bottom of the ocean are no longer myths, but actual archaeological finds. I believe, as many scholars do, that Atlantis was an empire whose influence spread across the globe. It was an enormous island continent that reached from the Strait of Gibraltar to the Gulf of Mexico. Just as the Roman Empire had its tentacles in almost every known country in the world at that time, so Atlantis, at the height of its glory, had its tentacles everywhere 10,000 years ago. In 421 BC, Plato wrote of a land beyond the Pillars of Hercules with chilling accuracy. Hundreds of archaeologists years later discovered ruins in Santorini that matched the exact description of Plato's writings. We also know that his writings also match our finds on the Minoan civilization, both thought to have been destroyed by volcanic activity. These societies were thought to be dense and overcrowded, their land alive with thousands of merchants and traders that came and went on ships. Both rich and prosperous lands. Millions of families, children, and animals died in the span of a single day. And thousands of years, and for thousands of years, society has shunned them, called them a farce, only because they had no proof of their existence. But now, with modern technology, our culture has discovered that actual land masses do indeed exist in what is now called the Atlantic Ocean. Now there is no question of their existence. Perhaps the details may have been elaborated upon and the truth stretched, but the basic fact remains that the people of Atlantis were real. Perhaps we don't know if they really had flying machines or if they had all these great gifts and powers, but we know that these people were real. We have found the skeletons and we have found those lands. DNA studies continue to evolve today. We learn more and more about our roots, about our ancient history. Because of the advances in DNA, the world now recognizes the Basque of southern Spain as descendants of the Atlanteans. There are two significant reasons besides actual DNA finds that set the Basque apart from the rest of the world. First, and most obvious, is the Basque language. It is different than any other language on earth, and nobody to this day has been able to trace its origin. The Basque also have a different sort of blood type. Their blood type is abundantly O negative, which is one of the rarest blood types on earth. I think only like 10% of the population. And we find that Basques themselves in the Iberian Peninsula are in the middle of a Latin country, and yet they both lack the coloring and the language of the people around them. Another strange thing, again with the blood, is that it is the only part of the world where this blood type abounds. Spaniards predominantly have A positive blood types and AB blood types. Also, their cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, are very different than the Spaniards and unlike any other culture in the world. Could Atlanteans have migrated, survived the horrible demise of their country? It is believed that before the deluge, there was a great exodus. Shirley Andrews, in her book, the book that I presented at the beginning, Lemuria and Atlantis, Study the Past to Survive in the Future, tells us that Atlanteans fled to various adjacent lands, including the region of the Pyrenees. Evidence has also been found that they migrated to Egypt, Greece, Spain, the Americas, Central, North, and South America. Regardless of where the Atlanteans fled, where the refugees went, they brought the awareness of their ancestors. But the world was not yet ready to embrace their knowledge and understanding. Unfortunately, their technology could not be duplicated. For example, if something were to happen to us and I became a refugee, a survivor of America, let's say, and we have everything here. We have computers, we have radios, we have television, and I find myself in this community where there is nothing. I cannot recreate a television set. Even though I had it, I know how to use it, and I'm very knowledgeable about it. But I can't build one. I can't recreate that technology. And so it was with the Atlanteans. The technology was lost. And the knowledge of it faded as new generations took over the old. Atlantean history and records were preserved in libraries, great megalithic monuments. Archaeologists archaeology found these megalithic stones submerged underwater in 5 sites off the coast of Spain. These 5 sites include Tarifa, now I don't know if I'm pronouncing all these right, Chipanua, Huelva, Rota, and Lexus. They have found these stones underwater under these 5 sites. In recent years, archaeologists, I can't say it today, why? Archaeology has also made discoveries off the coast of Sicily. They found a sunken ship carrying orichalcum. Orichalcum is a metal that does not exist in the modern world, an advanced alloy that in modern times is too difficult to create. It was described in the works of Plato and has been found to be, in modern times, they've discovered it is a mixture of copper and zinc. Is impossible and to recreate in modern day times. It has a reddish tone to it, and according to Plato, it was used to cover many of the Atlantic temples and believed to have spiritual properties. 39 ingots were found in the sunken ship off the coast of Sicily. In 1949, the Archaeological Society of America found a ton of similar sea biscuits from the ocean floor south of the Azores in shape of plates, each one with a depression in the center, all approximately 6 inches in diameter and 1.5 inches thick. Their surface relatively smooth, except for the depression. Tests determined that the sea biscuits were about 12,000 years old, and they were man-made from limestone, formed above the surface. Ancient texts across the globe, from the Far East to Central America, all describe a land of considerable size that once existed on the surface in the Pacific Ocean called Lemuria, and another land called Atlantis that existed in the Atlantic. Lemuria may have originated from the word lemures, a Latin word Romans used to describe the spirit of their dead ancestors who walked by night. Today, the ancient sunken continent in the Pacific Ocean is a place with 2 names. They call it Lemuria and Mu interchangeably. According to researchers, it extended from the southeast portion of Hawaii to the Easter Islands. With its center somewhat south of the equator, narrow channels of ocean divided the land into 3 sections. The western section of the large island gradually sank, and we're having similar things happening here where we live in California. Newport Beach, the tide is rising, and like last week, there's been flooding there, and it's been hard for people to keep their cars on the streets. And now it's almost exactly what these people describe, not at the extent of what happened in Atlantis, but it's very plausible because it is happening to us in California now. As the ocean waters threatened their homes and temples, people moved to higher, safer ground: Java, Borneo, New Guinea, and Australia. Archaeologist Stacy Judd reports that natives of Easter Island believe that they are living on the peak of a holy mountain of Mu. They believe Easter Island was formed from 3 extinct volcanoes and is the only portion of their motherland that the sea has not covered. Lemuria is believed to be the cradle of humankind. Atlantis came about 50,000 years later. This is just a map of Atlantis, of what they believe the island looked like. And here's another tidbit of information as I came across while doing my research. I learned this is going to be crazy for everybody, and I thought it was a really interesting thing to present. I found out, and I think I'm going to use it in one of my novels, I found out that skeletons of men were found that were 9 feet tall, buried in the Pacific Islands, and similar ones have been unearthed in California and Arizona, and on the banks of the Mississippi in 1885, while quarrying rock for a dam 2 feet below the river. Workers found petrified remains of a gigantic human skeleton, 9.5 inches long. It was in a grave that had been dug out of solid granite. These skeletons are believed to be the remains of Atlantean refugees who settled in the Americas. I also found accounts detailing ancient underground dwellings and tunnels according to archaeological data prevailing worldwide. It is theorized that hundreds of thousands of years ago, people chose to live under the surface. This is when all the volcanic action, all the earthquakes were happening. According to this theory, they acquired the ability to easily build large living spaces and connecting them to a network of caverns. The Yucatan in Central America is one example of extensive underground living spaces. People enlarged and occupied for hundreds of years until volcanic action and earthquakes subsided. Time and time again, we find the imprint of an ancient civilization, evidence that they not only existed, but survived, used their intellect to overcome adversity. These individuals became our ancestors, intermixed with different races across the world, eventually losing their racial uniqueness, their blood of origin absorbed into the gene pool. In 1921, geologist William Niven uncovered stone tablets in Mexico, excavating at the depth of 12 feet and 5 miles northwest of Mexico City. These tablets were carved from volcanic rock, all of them with peculiar pictographs outlined in red. In the years that followed, while exploring the nearby vicinity, Niven found more than 2,000 additional strange stones. From the height and debris above, he estimated they were 12,000 years old and probably closer to 50,000 years old. So there was a form of written language 50,000 years ago. There is a shared belief amongst geological and archaeological communities that Lemurians also traveled to Mount Shasta, which rises 14,000 feet in Northern California. Here, they used sound vibrations to expand an already existing cavern and built an underground city, which they called Telos. Lemurians, and this you may choose to believe or not believe, it's believed by some people that Lemurians still survived underground and there may still be a society of people living there today. Some Atlantean refugees are also believed to have made their way to the underground city before the flood. Life always finds a way to continue, always succeeds. Survivors spread across the entire globe, adapting to new ways of life, leaving behind their own splendid worlds of advanced technology and unparalleled beauty to save themselves and to save their families. Author Shirley Andrews writes that in 350 BC, Plato wrote a detailed description of a country on a fertile land called Atlantis. Plato's Atlantis was an extensive island before it sank in about 10,000 BC. It was in the Atlantic Ocean. He placed it in front of the Pillars of Hercules, or the Straits of Gibraltar, called the Pillars of Hercules because of an emperor of the African Tuaregs, who controlled shipping through the narrow passageway. 3 times Plato asserts that his Atlantean information is true. He carefully outlines his sources and researchers who checked on them, confirming that his authority when Plato said they did. The subject of Atlantis fascinated Plato, and to learn more, it is said that he consulted the students of Pythagoras from 582 to 500 BC. and others who were acquainted with the ancient mythological, historical, and geological lore. Proclus, AD 410 to 485, reports that before Plato wrote about Atlantis, he made a trip to Egypt to confirm his data. He talked to priests. For his Atlantean account, Plato also had access to ancient records, such as the remarkable Library of Alexandria. It was said that this magnificent library included information about cultures and religions from all around the world, and for hundreds of years, learned people assembled there. In this attractive North African city, to exchange information and to contribute to a growing collection of valuable manuscripts. Eventually, almost millions of scrolls and books from all parts of the world were made available to scholars who traveled to Alexandria. As he neared the end of his life, Plato wrote about Atlantis in an effort to ensure that the history of this lost civilization would be preserved. He received some of this information from priests and from members of a secret brotherhood who swore him into secrecy. In the past, these mystery schools kept wisdom from those who were initiated into their society. It helped ensure the safety of their intellectual treasures during perilous times when raiders were pillaging the land, like what happened to Alexandria, how they burned down the library. Apparently, some of these records have been restored and hidden, many say, in Egypt, underneath pyramids, and underneath other, in Central America, South America, under their pyramids as well. Wherever the Atlantean refugees went, they took their knowledge and they hid it. In the past, in the Timaeus, Plato describes the final days of the main island remained, which was located in the Atlantic Ridge, a mountainous section of the seafloor that runs north-south in the Atlantic Ocean between Europe and the Americas. This land is not granite like continents, but volcanic. It's actually volcanic material that comes through rifts on the ocean floor, where sections of the Earth's crust are separating. Proof that portions of the Atlantic Ridge were above the surface until 9,500 BC is available. Innumerable other books which offer the results of extensive studies, analysis, and samples and geography of the terrain, glacial residue, lava, coral sand deposits, and plant growth. The evidence is convincing and readily available. The hills, the valleys, and the broad central plain of Atlantis are clearly visible on an ocean floor map of the Atlantic Ridge today. The Azores Islands, Madeira, and the Cape Verde Islands, which were the mountaintops of Atlantis, are all that remain of the once flourishing land. These islands' steep coastal hillsides extend almost perpendicularly down into the ocean floor without underwater platforms. Plato's reports of Atlantis include the geography of the country, an extensive description of its massive capital city, information about the government, the army, the people's extensive use of gold and silver, and much, much more. The inhabitants of Atlantis had a major geographical problem. The Atlantic Ridge lies at the intersection of two sections or plates of the Earth's crust, and three sections intersect in the region of the Azores Plateau. Although it is below the surface, it is one of the most volcanic areas in the world. For these sections of Earth's surface frequently change positions. The movement is very, very slow, but when it happens, it stimulates damage, earthquakes, and volcanoes. Jacques Cousteau offers some interesting proof that Atlantis was above the surface long ago. While his submarine explored around the Andros, the largest island in the Bahamas, at the depth of 165 feet, he found a huge grotto or cave with large stalactites. Tests of sediments on the walls of the cave confirmed that it was above water in and before 10,000 BC. Andros Island in the center of the Bahama Bank has many caves with writing on the walls that is similar to ancient written symbols in the Canary Islands. No one in the world has been able to decipher these far-flung hieroglyphs. I'm not sure how to pronounce this one, Lucasian caverns near the Grand Bahama Island are also now submerged, but they were once above the surface. Winding passages extend underwater for 8 miles to include a domed hall, rooms with circular skylights, human bones in a group of caverns on the Grand Bahama Island, which can only be accessed by driving or diving through the lake. And additional evidence shows that thousands of years ago, this land was above the surface people called Atlantis. Atlanteans moved westward, looking for a new place to live. They settled in Cuba, the Yucatan, and Mexico. Memories of the people of Mu, whom the Atlanteans met and intermarried with in Central America, are still evident. Inscriptions on the Yucatan mountains monuments indicate that they were constructed as memorials to thousands of unfortunate people of the motherland, Mu, who died when the ocean had covered it. Scientists have several theories as to what was responsible for the disastrous event of 10,000 BC. The most probable is a terrific shock that provoked the planet's axis to shift. And this disturbed the stability of the hot, thick liquid that lies beneath the Earth's surface. Eventually, in vulnerable places, the fragile crust just crumbled, and the island fell apart, and people died. German physicist Dr. Otto Muck believes that at the time of the final sinking of Atlantis, an asteroid several miles in diameter plunged into the Atlantic Ocean off the eastern coast of the United States. There are huge holes where pieces of the hot, destructive demon penetrated the Earth's crust near the Carolinas. These holes are quite visible today on the ocean floor, and photographs taken from the air show hundreds of elliptical craters called Carolina rings, creating pockmarks in Georgia, Florida, Virginia, Maryland, North and South Carolina. Muck estimates that when it smashed into us, the rapidly moving asteroid was as strong as 30,000 hydrogen bombs. Another plausible theory explaining the dimension suggests that as a result of a tremendous jolt, the fast-moving body from space hit the planet, and cracks developed on either side of the Atlantic ridge. Red-hot magma from the inside of the Earth shot up with terrific speed through those spaces and melted the bottom of the land, and the island crumbled. The beautiful country sadly sank into the sea. Lemuria may have suffered a similar fate. There is modern proof now that a land did exist in the Atlantic Ocean. Numerous cities have been discovered submerged underwater. There is no denying their existence, they're there. But even with scientific proof, people still do not believe, refuse to accept that our history had a different beginning than we once believed. There are thousands of scientific records and archaeological finds, proof that both Atlantis and Lemuria existed. But it would take me days to expand on this, so we're cutting off the fact portion of the talk here. So prepare yourselves. The following excerpts are not considered fact by some people. These are from Edgar Cayce, The Sleeping Prophet. So this is what some of you may call the woo-woo section. Some of us call it truth. So take this information or leave it, it's up to you. Cayce used hypnosis and past life regression to attain some of his answers. He gets into the story of who the Atlanteans were. We get to know them as people. We learn how they felt at the end when it was near and how they died. In one of his sessions, he said that in a beautiful city on a hillside overlooking the sea, devout Atlanteans erected lovely temples with large pillars of onyx and topaz inlaid with precious stones that reflected the sun's light. People described these things, and hundreds of people described the same exact thing. People that didn't know each other, people across the globe, people that still remember. He says the people who participated in the temple, they even described the clothing, a wraparound garment with sleeves that hung down, resembling our modern day hospital gowns. It was tied at the waist with a lightweight metallic band, unlike any metal we know. He tells us the basic color of their garments and sash, earrings, pendants, bracelets, headbands. And he says that they indicated whether these people were healers, students, or teachers at the temple. And it also showed the level of enlightenment that they attained. Edgar Cayce tells us that the Iroquois also of North America are direct descendants of the Atlanteans, and that they preserved the matriarchal culture of their ancestors. Sorry guys, really sorry here, but Atlantis is believed to have been a matriarchy. The earliest European records indicate that the Iroquois women controlled government and owned land, and that when they left the world, they passed down to their daughters. Music was also important to the Atlantean temples. Priests used it extensively in their healing practices. It was especially helpful with periods of depression and other mental disorders. Atlanteans realized that every person has a certain vibration and that disease results from conflicting or discordant vibrations. If music is correctly employed, it may eliminate harmful vibrations and offer a channel through which the natural rhythm and balance of the patient can be restored. And before becoming priestesses, the women were required to attain musical degrees and attend special colleges where they were trained as excellent musicians, healers, and learned to play the flutes, stringed instruments, including harps, lutes, and to sing a variety of chants. And now again, the reason we're even mentioning all these little tiny things is because hundreds of people that don't know each other around the world have described the same exact thing. And people that have not been hypnotized and remember on their own, remember the same exact thing. It is believed that Atlanteans were far more advanced than what we are today, more than we ever dreamed to be. They had flying cars, electricity, running water, everything we have and more. Plus, they could teleport, space travel, time travel, do things that we only dream of. In comparison, we're barbaric. We're a backward civilization. There is no comparison between the two. Edgar Cayce records the actions of the priests and scientists in Atlantis, how they were a factor in the catastrophe of 10,000 BC. But the behavior of the people in Atlantis, and this is really important, the behavior of the people in Atlantis contributed to the demise of their country. During most of their long history, Atlanteans and Lemurians practiced a spiritual practice they called the Law of One. They were compassionate in their relationships with others and lovingly cared for the earth with respect and consideration. Gradually, however, as the emphasis on technology increased and their focus on scientific achievement grew, they lost the respect for nature. And they tried to assume control over it. Natural resources became something to be used for their own benefit. When technology assumed a leading role in their lives, it had a dehumanizing effect. People became obsessed with it. With tangible objects that were readily available, they wanted to acquire more and more. They substituted machinery for metal tools in the same manner that we put our dependence on computers. As they further fragmented their awareness into the physical, they lost respect for what they could not perceive, for the woo-woo, let's say. They lost sight of it. Of the five, they only saw with the five senses, and all that lies beyond the third dimension was lost. The spiritual quality of life became unimportant to them. They separated from the Creator and searched elsewhere for love. Standards declined. Anger, greed, hate, envy increased, and crime was prevalent. Sound familiar? Today, more than any time in history, Atlantis has gained popularity. And even though science has proven its existence, people still question it. I believe that there is a deeper message here. And it's not that I'm right and that you're wrong, or that you're right and I'm wrong. The reason I believe that so many accounts of Atlantis keep cropping up over and over again is because we in the United States of America have very similar habits to those described in many of the accounts about the Atlanteans. And we, like them, are reacting the very same way. We Americans are repeating history, living a parallel life. A parallel Atlantis has been created in the United States. There is a message hidden here for people to wake up and not repeat the past, not allow their beloved America to fall the same way Atlantis did. Both were the greatest countries on earth. Their influence spread worldwide. Both believed that acquiring more would bring them happiness. Both became greedy and became somewhat of a me generation. So before history repeats itself, change, give back, be compassionate and understanding. Become the change you want to see. Do not let the fate of Atlantis become your own. Perhaps our ancestors, buried under colossal amounts of water, are screaming out from the ocean depths, warning us, watching over us. Now for the next portion, I've spoken the facts. I've given an excerpt of my novel, and I've also spoken on things that are not considered fact by some of the population. And now, as I was preparing for this talk as well, these are some of my characters in my novels that I created. But I also have some snippets that I found. These are the people the Basque people that live in the Iberian Peninsula. I'll play just a couple minutes of this. And these people, you can see, are so
Nestled in the
different.
mountains between France and Spain, there's a semi-isolated population of native European people that have long puzzled anthropologists, linguists, and historians because although they are Caucasoid, they do not fit in with the rest of the European population. Their language, for example, is distinctly unique in Europe and not related to any other Indo-European language. But that's not the only thing that's unique about the Basque. The Basque turned out to also be unique in terms of blood. Prior to the advent of research tools, investigators used the ABO blood groups to study the relationships between human populations as well as their migration patterns. Each person's blood is one of four major types: A, B, AB, or O. Blood types are determined by the types of antigens on the blood cells. Antigens are proteins on the surface of blood cells that can cause a response from the immune system. The Rh factor is a type of protein on the surface of red blood cells. Most people are Rh positive. Those who do not have the Rh factor are negative, which compromises about 15% of the world's population, but appears in much higher percentage among the Basque, which as a population contain among the highest levels of Rh negative blood in the world. The Basque people currently inhabit the area surrounding the Pyrenees Mountains, where Cro-Magnon man left behind some of his and her most famous artwork over 30,000 years ago. But exactly who are the Basque and where did they come from? I decided a great place to find out is the University of Nevada, since it houses the Center for Basque Studies.
That's you guys.
This organization is primarily a research center that conducts and publishes on Basque-related topics such as anthropology, history, cultural studies, etc. Here's what they had to say about the Basque people and their origins, and this comes from their website's frequently asked questions. Question: where did the Basque come from? No one knows exactly where the Basque come from. Some say they have lived in the area since Cro-Magnon man first roamed Europe. Some say they are descended from the original Iberians. More fanciful theories exist as well. One is that the Basques are the descendants of the survivors of Atlantis. Question: where did the Basque language come from? Just as no one is sure about the origins of the Basques themselves, linguists are not in agreement over the origins of Euskara, the Basque language, either. When asked, I found that the majority of the Basque people themselves maintain that they came from Atlantica, a powerful maritime nation that sank into the Atlantic Ocean after a terrible cataclysm, and from which a few survivors reached the Bay of Biscay and the Pyrenees Mountains. This, they say, is not just mythology, but their true pre-European ancestry. There's another ancient people who claim racial lineage from the mythical Atlanteans. The Berbers are currently located geographically around Mount Atlas, but inhabit much of North Africa long before the Arabs arrived. The Berbers are considered the aboriginals of the area, and their origins beyond that are not officially known. Here we have a population, many of whom have blue eyes and light hair, living in Northwest Africa of all places, and amongst some of the blonde tribes still living near the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, the percentage of Rh negative blood can reach 40%. Now keep in mind, that's not the general national average, but restricted to certain local tribes. Anthropologists, for the most part, dismissed them for many years because they didn't fit well with the out of Africa paradigm. so it was presumed that they had migrated from somewhere in Europe. However, that theory has been abandoned with the current understanding of genetics. Scientists now accept the genetic evidence that concludes Berbers are an indigenous people, which they believe are descended from native Upper Paleolithic Cro-Magnon types, going straight back into the Pleistocene or Ice Age. This should make it easier to understand why the oldest remains found in Egypt, nicknamed Ginger, and currently on display in the British Museum, has naturally red hair. This is pre-dynastic, which means before the pharaohs and before the accepted dating of the pyramids. I can go on for quite some time about blonde and red-headed mummies and blue-eyed statues, but I'll save that for a future video on ancient Egypt. For now, let us turn to another population native to an island off of the African coast who also left mummies and pyramids. The Guanches were very tall, powerfully built, blonde and red-haired indigenous natives of the Canary Islands, specifically the island of Tenerife. To date, there is still no evidence that the Guanches had any knowledge of maritime technology, which begs the question, how did they get there? This isolation allowed the Guanche to maintain a racial exclusivity until the time of the Spanish conquest. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th edition, concerning the ethnic origins and racial identity of the Canary Island Guanches, and I quote, "The Guanches are thought to have been of Cro-Magnon origin, with blue or gray eyes and blondish hair." Madame Blavatsky, foundress of the Theosophical Society, points out that the genetic relations between these three populations, well over 100 years before our modern understanding of DNA, and I quote, she says, "If then the Basque and Cro-Magnon cavemen are of the same race as the Canaries Guanches, it follows that the former are also allied to the Aborigines of America. The Atlantean affinities of the three types becomes patent." My name is Robert Sepper. I'm a formerly educated anthropologist and now author, and I'd like to invite you to explore some fascinating mysteries with me, which for the most part have eluded any serious consideration in mainstream academia. Species with Amnesia, Our Forgotten History, and Gods with Amnesia, Subterranean Worlds of Inner Earth. I'd like to thank those of you who share my passion of ancient history, archaeology, and continue to support me in my work. So I appreciate it and all the encouragement. Thank you.
So this concludes my presentation. I do have other things, but it would take too long. So I'm open for the Q&A now. I'm not sure how that works, Len. You're on mute. Let me get off the share.
Why don't you unshare your screen? And there you go, gallery view. Okay, a lot of people don't have their video turned on.
Okay.
And if everybody wants to unmute, they can. Okay, so I'm the only one that wrote anything. If anybody would like to speak, the two that I wrote was, you know, if they were so smart, how come they couldn't foresee their own downfall? And my other comment was, what wasn't the Atlantean downfall due to geological calamity, not because they didn't use their natural resources cautiously?
It was said that there was 3 natural disasters that eventually destroyed the continent. Towards the end of Atlantis, it became a bunch of islands. When the first catastrophe hit, there was, this is where they said that an asteroid hit the original population, but it didn't destroy all of Atlantis. And then another disaster came, and then the third and final is the one were their technology. And they began to mess. They had weapons like we do, like atomic bombs, and they are believed to have destroyed Lemuria. They used weapons of mass destruction, and they destroyed the whole continent of Lemuria. And also with the changes, it wasn't all changes in the climate, it was that they had learned to control aspects of the weather. Like we can genetically manipulate things, they were able to create storms, they were able to create earthquakes and destroy nations and people. And they got greedy and they didn't foresee what was coming. They destroyed the earth and the earth fought back. Mother Nature came back at them and took them down. But how the story goes. But there were other factors involved. There was modern technology. There was food. There was asteroids, and there was different things that hit that place. And the Atlantic ridge, it being on this Atlantic ridge, also placed it in a very perilous position. But Lemuria was not in that position.
But what year, what period, how many years ago were they supposed to have lived?
Supposedly, they were around for hundreds and thousands of years. 10,000 years ago is when the island actually fell.
10,000 years ago. Okay, so that means, let's see, I really don't remember all my history, but when was the Ice Age? The last Ice Age, about 10,000 years ago, right?
I think it's about 10,000 years.
Okay, so they existed before the Ice Age.
Yeah. But weather conditions and different, everything together played a part in the final destruction. But they existed for thousands of years before that.
Okay. Would anybody else like to ask her some questions or give a rebuttal or anything?
Hi, this is Leslie. I don't know if you'll notice, it's sort of a sidestep to your presentation, but you talked a lot about underwater discovery and exploration of these different areas and different cities and areas of civilization that are now underwater. Do you know, like, what is the guiding laws for doing underwater investigation for those kinds of things? Is it like so many miles off of the coast, it just is a free-for-all? Or do cities or countries lay claim to things off of their coast when they do those explorations?
I think Egypt is one of the countries that doesn't let people do a lot of excavation and investigation because there were a lot of archaeologists, because it's believed that a lot of the secrets of Atlantis are hidden in the pyramids of Egypt, underneath the Sphinx and a bunch of things. And so the Egyptians have not given permission, and it's been very difficult for people to excavate in Egypt. But other countries, they found things in the Mediterranean, and they didn't have issues with that, but there are countries that have serious issues with that.
Anybody else?
The Sicilians found the ship and they allowed people to do research.
Kathy, did you want to speak?
No.
Okay, your thing came on. I just wondered.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody else? No? Gary, what do you say?
I don't have much to add. What she said, there is a lot of evidence from what we would call prehistory of communication and interchange between Europe and Central America. Numerous authors have written about it, and archaeologists and anthropologists have documented it. Is it Atlantis or Lemuria? Well, that's up to the individual to draw their own conclusions.
Here's some familiar names here and faces. This is Jane and Tom and Cookie and Kathy.
Hey, Cookie put something in the chat. I'm too dumb to find the raise my hand, but I have a question. I'll ask you, I want to know if 123 and me or Ancestry.com show a particular ethnicity.
You know, I was really excited to find out that I was 15% Iberian Peninsula. And the people, the Basque, are from the Iberian Peninsula, which are said to be the survivors of Atlantis.
The only thing I know about the Basque people is I've met quite a few of them. It's back when I lived on a farm. I grew up on a farm. We had a lot of sheep. They were the ones who came and sheared the sheep all the time. Boy, they were really good at it too. That's the only thing I know about the Basque people. But anyway, so my theory.
That's right. We have a big colony of them up by Elko, right?
Right,
Yes.
I think so. Okay, so my theory is that Atlantis has something to do with aliens coming to the Earth, and that's how I would explain. I think it was one of their civilizations. They decided to abandon it. Hey, that's as good as anything, right?
There's the original story that was from the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, that the original colony of Atlantis was founded by people from the Pleiades. And that's where the alien aspect of it comes in. Then they obviously interbred with humankind that is here, and developed the Atlantis civilization. But yes, the originals are said to be from the Pleiades.
Anybody else have anything? We're kind of out of time at this point. Somebody's got some static in their microphone. Not sure who. Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was fantastic. I never really knew anything about Atlantis. I'm not quite sure I do now. There's a lot of things you presented. And I don't think I'm going to lose any sleep over it, because I don't worry about things I can't control, and things that came before me, I can't control those. Are you curious? Yeah, I'm also curious what happens when I die. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Terry.
I would like to thank Leslie for listening in tonight, and hopefully we'll be testing, and she'll be a chapter member one day.
Thank you for joining my talk, Leslie.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
We'll see, Leslie. You got to pass the test. My wife keeps saying that she's smart. I say, show me. She won't do it. She says she doesn't need to.
That's a pretty good argument. I like that. I did the practice test, but yeah, as soon as I guess I can have a proctor, then I'll be all set to go, right, Terry?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a couple of young people that want to test as soon as we kind of are able to do that. So, well, everybody, thank you very much. It's been a night event for Southern Nevada Mensa chapter. I appreciate it. We recorded this. I have to sort of convert it and decode it. And we'll post it on our website if you want a copy. Elizabeth, let me know, and I'll give you an invitation to my box file where you can actually have a copy of the thing. Okay?
Yeah, I'd like a copy. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a nice night.
Bye.
Keep cool and put your mask on.